of the show, call 256-413-1029. Now, let's go inside the Fox Sports 102.9 studios with Chase Robinson for WKXX Live.
Good afternoon. Welcome in on a Tuesday, August the 2nd, here on Fox Sports 102.9. So glad you are joining us. Hope your day is going great. You got Chase Robinson here. And as we introduced to you yesterday, we welcome Gerhard Mathangani to our team here as he'll be on WKXX Live with us every afternoon from 2 to 4. And Gerhard, great to have you back.
It's good to be back. Day one's in the books. I'm not gone yet. So once again, thank you for taking the chance. And yesterday was a whole lot of fun. I expect the same thing today.
Absolutely. And we've got a lot to dive into today. And as we talked a little yesterday about the trade deadline, that is a little bit later on, 5 or 6 o'clock tonight, I believe, is the deadline. But lots of moves are being made. And we kind of anticipated Juan Soto. So we'll get to that, of where he's heading and what Washington is getting in return. But I want to start with the Braves and not any trade-related news, but some news that came out from the Braves organization involving Austin Riley, who we talked a good bit about yesterday because he had the walk-off to win on Sunday, has had a fantastic summer, and really a great career as an Atlanta Brave. And that career in a Braves uniform is going to go at least 10 years longer, as he has signed a huge extension, 10 years, $212 million to stay with the Braves.
Yeah, it's the most lucrative contract the Braves have ever given out. And if people might have thought that the Braves had one philosophy years and years ago about, getting rid of players or developing young guys and not necessarily doing what the quote unquote Yankees and Red Sox and other teams did. Well, the Braves are showing you they're committed to some of their younger guys and being able to create a core. Obviously, running from last year's championship, you want to keep a lot of these young guys together. I think the most interesting thing is that I could see if Riley had 1 year left on his deal. He has 3 years left on his deal, and then they extended him for 10 years more with the price tag of $212 million. It shows you the commitment that this team has to not only Austin Riley, who's having, once again, another great season. He ended off last year really good, really strong, and then he's having another great year again this year. He's 25 years old, so he's right there in that sweet spot where he can sign a big deal. He will feel good about his market value. He'll still produce the way he's producing right now. I think if you're a Braves fan, you have to be super excited about what they're doing with this young core, especially with Austin Riley, who right now sits, I think, number 2 as far as the shortest odds go for MVP. So he's living up to the bargain, and I'm pretty sure they're excited about his contract.
Yeah, for sure. And again, a big contract to Austin Riley, very deserving. And you think about Chipper Jones at that third base position, and he was really the face of the organization. Do you think that's what they're kind of aiming for in Austin Riley, of a guy who's going to stick with him, who's going to be there, who's going to be, locked down in the infield, just kind of that face of the Braves?
Yeah, I think so. And I don't think that they're trying to maybe actively pursue it as in like, hey, we're going to make this guy the face of the Braves. I think they say, hey, he produces no matter what. So if we can get him to both produce and then we, have this long-term deal with him, I think he fits into that role really well. I think the Braves, in all of their championship runs, and this is not really isolated to the Braves, this is really, I think, any championship team. You look back at those Yankee teams with Derek Jeter, and you look back at other teams that had, maybe 1 or 2 or 3 guys that are in the locker room, those guys you can count on. Austin Riley is quickly, to me, emerging into that guy. They drafted him with a first-round draft pick about 4 years ago, and then he made his Major League Baseball debut last year, and then he's exploded this year, and what he did in the month of July is sensational. Yeah. Had numbers that were comparable to the great Hank Aaron. So I think that he is molding himself into that role without the Braves having to, put a square peg into a round hole situation. I think that he's naturally developing as the face of this franchise. And it's kind of like a 3-headed monster in the same sense we had back in the 90s with the pitching rotation with Glavine and Maddox and Smoltz. I think you'll have a kind of a offshoot of that with now Ozzie Albies, Albies, as well as Acuna Jr. and Austin Riley, with Riley being the guy that they solidified first. All 3 will be on the team till at least 2025. but he obviously has the longest deal locked up to 2032.
Yeah. Really, really cool, though, for Austin Riley getting that extension with the Braves. And the organization has made some trades as well. Will Smith, who has been not the closer most of the year this year because of Kenley Jansen coming in, but last year really took that closing role, did great in the postseason. Was one of those guys, though, that you think back to the season, especially the summer, as a Braves fan, you got a little nervous when Will Smith hit the mound. But he was a vital part of the Braves winning the World Series. He has been traded away to the Astros for right-handed pitcher Jake Odorizzi, I believe is how you say the name. But that is just one of the trades so far for the Braves. Another one with an outfielder. But I think it's good for the Braves to go out and get another arm.
Yeah, and they have now 6 starting pitchers on that rotation. You can carry 13 on your 26-man roster, but I think what he gives them is another arm that can start games. Because if you think about it, the back end, not really the back end, because Kyle Wright's really made a name for himself, but Wright and both Wright and Spencer Strider, they're both young guys, and there is a thing in baseball as the season goes along and that grind goes along. A lot of times these young guys can struggle, and if they are going to struggle, it's good to have somebody that is seasoned, that has played, in the dog days of summer, and then can still bring their best in the fall, late in the regular season, early, and then deep in the playoffs. And I think that Odorizzi really does that for the Atlanta Braves, being able to give them some peace of mind. And we've seen guys like Madison Bumgarner and others who have starting roles who end up coming in relief, who can end up coming in and being a setup guy and giving you 4, 5, 6 pitches, or 4, 5, 6 innings, 2 or 3 innings, maybe come in the 7th, maybe come in the 8th. And so being able to use those kind of players in versatile roles. So I won't be a bit surprised if he kind of slides into that, starts as a starting pitcher, and then as we get deeper into the postseason, we start to see him maybe as a setup guy coming on a little bit late, maybe not necessarily as a closer, but a guy that can give you inning number 6, 7, and 8, or a combination of that. Or if Kyle Wright struggles, having him slide back there and pitch some of those later innings as well. So I think this gives the Braves defensive, the coaching staff and all the guys that handle the pitching rotation, it really gives them another sense of relief, a sigh of relief, knowing that they have another solidified star there in their rotation.
Odorizzi has made 12 starts with the Astros this season, 3.75 ERA, was on the injured list some. He came back at the beginning of July, but his most recent start was a few days ago, July 31st against the Mariners, went 7 scoreless. So should be a good pickup there for the Braves. Also, the Braves going out and getting an outfielder, Robbie Grossman from the Tigers, and in trade left-handed pitcher Chris Anglin. But good to add another outfield, maybe another bat to the lineup there as well than Grossman.
Yeah, I think so. And I think with the Braves at this point, I think they have their core. They have the guys that they know that they can go in and make postseason runs. And we're going to talk about another team that's made a huge trade, because I think the NL, the chase for the NL pennant this year will be very, very difficult. And obviously, you have to factor in there might be some injuries to some key players from different teams. But to see the Braves understanding the landscape of what's going on right now in the National League and saying, hey, let's beef this up a little bit. They had their core guys coming in, but both Odorizzi as well as Grossman, I think they will both be able to give this team some much needed help. One on the offensive side with his bat, one on the defensive side with his pitching, and then to add on to what they have already into the rotation right now. And Odorizzi, keep in mind, he's a guy that was an all-star just a couple of years ago, and then he, as you mentioned, had that injury. But I mean, we're not too far removed from his 15-win season back with the Minnesota Twins in 2019. So these are guys that can produce on a very, very high level, and I think the Braves really need that as you look around the corner to the postseason, which I think will be very competitive this year in the NL.
Absolutely. So the Braves making some trades, deadline later on, but there's been some other big trades involving Juan Soto. We talked about it yesterday. the possibility of where he could end up. He has a new home. We will talk about that coming up on the other side of this break. We'll also get to your phone calls on the show today. Andrew Bone, BamaInsider.com, will join us at 2:30, talk some Alabama football recruiting because it's been an eventful 24 hours for the Crimson Tide, getting two big pickups there on the recruiting front in the class of 2023. So lots to get to on this Tuesday edition of WKXX Live, and we will continue with more next.
Not littering is not hard.
Welcome back in. It is WKXX Live. Chase and Gerhard with you this afternoon. It is Tuesday, August the 2nd. It is the trade deadline for Major League Baseball coming up in a couple of hours. we've been keeping an eye on really since Juan Soto decided he did not want to take that big extension from the Nationals, that we were going to hear his name come across here on the trade deadline. Well, it did earlier, and the Padres have gone out. They have traded for Juan Soto as well as Josh Bell to come to San Diego. And I believe 5 or 6 guys are heading to the Nationals in this big deal.
Yeah, this is probably the biggest, one of the biggest trades in my lifetime, and probably considering, everything that I've looked at, one of the biggest trades in Major League Baseball history, especially this close to the deadline, and for a Padres team that seems to be doing what we talked about with the Braves earlier. It's a team that looks to be committed to winning. They're sitting right there, almost in the shadow of the LA Dodgers. And right now, they're currently second in the NL West, 12 games back of the Dodgers. But this puts them right in the middle of the contention for a pennant and maybe even a World Series. They're putting together an incredible baseball team. They already have Fernando Tatis and Manny Machado. Yesterday, they went and got Josh Hader, one of the top pitchers, top closers in the game, and got him from the Brewers. And then to add Juan Soto, a young player to this roster in a great place to play baseball. There's a lot of baseball players that love it out there in San Diego. And this haul that they got for him, 6 players overall, 5 that were named, and one that says that there's another Major League Baseball player. So 6 players overall for the 2 they get back in both Soto and Bell. I think this is a monster deal. And this right now, I think this puts San Diego now squarely in the hunt for a championship. And obviously, they probably won't be able to catch the Dodgers. They're 12 games back right now. I mean, unless something crazy happens, which I really don't expect, then I don't see them winning the division. However, they could still easily get themselves into the playoffs through the wild card. And then after that, it's game on. We talked earlier about the Braves and how important this race in the National League will be. Well, this move just kind of solidifies that.
Yeah, let's go to the phone lines here. Welcome on to WKXX Live. Who do we got here? Okay. If you were trying to get a hold of us there, 256-413-1029, 256-413-1029. But when you see Juan Soto, a guy who 23 years old, being pursued the way he has,
right?
I mean, I think that can be something for the younger guys in baseball. To know that, you look at a lot of these older players, guys like Freddie Freeman. I mean, all the attention that he got. I think this is good, though, for younger baseball players to see what's going on with Juan Soto here.
Exactly. And Soto, as you mentioned, he's a young guy, and he plays the game so enthusiastically. I don't know if many people caught the home run derby, but just watching the highlights of the home run derby, he is so enthusiastic about playing. He brings an energy and a spirit to not only the game, but I think to the locker room as well. And I think it will revitalize what they're trying to do there in San Diego. It looks like the Padres have now have a very concerted effort to make sure that they put themselves in position to try to make a run. Now, of course, some of the issues with them will be their pitching. As they stand right now, they're 58 and 46. As I said earlier, 12 games back of the Dodgers, who are obviously one of the best teams in baseball, and a run differential of plus 35, and the Dodgers run differential is plus 201. So we will see how this all works out with the team as they move forward. But you're right. I think that a move like this really does kind of infuse some of the younger players in the game. That you don't have to take the biggest and best deal that's on the table right now. Go get pursued, and we'll see what happens in the offseason with his free agency. Obviously turned down a really big deal, 15 years, north of $400 million. We talked about Austin Riley's deal, and his deal even dwarfed that one. And so I think that we're in a good position right now in the National League, and I think the Padres have put themselves in a position where, in my opinion at least, they'll be one of the more fun teams to watch there in that division. That division is really competitive. Obviously, we saw what the Giants were able to do last year. You have the Dodgers this year, the Padres this year. We talked about the Braves earlier. Obviously, with the Mets in the NL East as well. Then in the Central, you have the Brewers. So the race for this pennant, to me, I think it will be really, really exciting. Lots of really good teams, lots of stars, and then great pitching, and then, of course, great hitting, and Soto adds to that.
Eric Hosmer, Padres first baseman, invoked his partial no-trade clause to reject his trade to the Nationals. Instead, he is heading to the Red Sox. So San Diego and Boston really haven't confirmed this, but that's where it's looking that Eric Hosmer is headed to the Red Sox and not the Nationals.
Right, and that one's going to be really interesting because he did have that clause in his deal where he can reject that trade. And of course, Hosmer later in his career, he doesn't want to go to a team that's rebuilding, and I'm sure the Nationals probably knew that, that would be his decision. And obviously, with a team like the Red Sox, it's good to add a player that has been there before. Hosmer, helped win a World Series championship, and so. I think he'll be right there in the middle of things, right there in the thick of things as they move along, and it'll be another situation I think for the Red Sox where they're in a chase as well. Obviously, they're chasing the Yankees, and to me, in my opinion, I believe that adding anytime you can add a player, even if it's a player that's a little bit longer in the tooth, that Joey Gallo is another player that is on the move today. If you can add a guy that's a veteran guy. Even if he's there for a clubhouse presence, even if he's there to help coach some of the younger guys, even if he's not the main guy producing on the field, I do think it adds some value to your club.
Yeah, you mentioned Yankees outfielder Joey Gallo is heading to the Dodgers in exchange for right-hander Clayton Beeter. He was the number 15 prospect in the organization, so that happened today as well. There's some other names that people are throwing around, like Ian Happ, possibly being traded. I know they were talking about him possibly to the Braves. Not sure if that'll happen, but there's some other guys, some notable names that I think could be in the talks later today.
That's exactly right. Ian Happ, and then also with Wilson Contreras, two Cubs that it looks like you have obviously you have your buyers and you have your sellers going on right now at the trade deadline. It looks like the Cubs will once again be sellers, and for those of you that is my team, and and it's one of those situations where I understand it, trying to go for some youth and getting back pieces in return to help really bolster what's to come in the future. And so it'll be interesting to see who are the buyers, if there are any buyers. We have a couple more hours going on right now in the trade deadline. I've been checking my notifications on my phone every chance that I get, and so far no other big domino has fallen, but we do expect to probably see either Hayden or Contreras, or a combination of both, or some other guys that are in and around the league possibly move to a team that's contending for a championship.
Yeah, and you think back to last year with especially the Braves. Anthopoulos went out and put together these guys who weren't having the best seasons where they were, but they really fit into place. Braves got hot. They won the World Series. I don't know if that's going to happen with any team across Major League Baseball, but I think this is a really cool chance for these teams to be able to put these pieces, to get these pieces that you may not think fit right now, but watching them in the next couple of months, and it totally transforms your team.
It certainly does. And baseball trades are really different, in my opinion, than basketball trades and football trades, because in baseball trades, I think for the most part, the baseball trade to me, as long as the player still produces at a certain level, as long as the move does not shake up too much about his actual game, you don't have to necessarily have the chemistry on the field. It's what you have off the field. If you can maintain that and have a strong locker room, that's the reason why I believe that the Braves once again are true contenders to win another championship this year, because they have that strong management both in the front office and in the clubhouse. And I think when you have both those, then you have the manager and Brian Snitker, who's done a fantastic job ever since he's taken over that position. I think in the general manager's suite right now, you have good decision making going on. but then you also have good leadership in their locker room, and it's a delicate balance. And baseball is a delicate balance because it is played at, like we talked about, the dog days of summer. You're traveling city to city. You have a game just about every other day or every day, it seems like, and so it's a grueling sport. It's a taxing sport. It's a grinding sport, but it's one where if you can take that champagne bath at the end of the season because you won a championship, it's all obviously worth it. And so all these teams are now jockeying for position. And outside of the American League, where we have some dominating teams right now in the National League, I think to me it's setting up to where all these teams understand, all these general managers who are making these decisions understand, hey, it might take a piece or two to get our team in a place where we think that we can compete for a championship.
Absolutely. So trade deadline is a few hours from now, and lots of noise has been made across Major League Baseball so far today. We're going to take a break, though, and talk some college football on the other side. Andrew Bone from BamaInsider.com. He is the recruiting expert for the Alabama Crimson Tide, and it's been a big day as far as commitments for the Crimson Tide. So we'll talk with Andrew Bone about that. WKXX Live is brought to you in part by Frank's Roofing. Our studio developed a leak, so we called Frank. The estimate was free, very fair pricing, and his crew was there, and they were on it. They were professional. They were courteous. They fixed the problem in one visit, and they didn't leave a mess. So do what we did. Trust Frank's Roofing for your shingle, metal, or flat roof repair or replacement. Call 256-458-8531 for a free estimate. That is Frank's Roofing. Andrew Bone joins us on the other side. Stick around. It is WKXX Live with Jason Gerhard here on Fox Sports 102.9.
WKXX 102.9.
We're back here on this Tuesday afternoon. WKXX Live. Chase Robinson and Gerhard Mathangani along with you this afternoon. And we're going to talk a little Alabama football recruiting now. We welcome on the guy who knows everything about Alabama football recruiting. That is Andrew Bone, BamaInsider.com, and now a part of that On3 Sports Group. Andrew, really appreciate you coming on with us this afternoon.
Absolutely. Chase, how you doing today?
Doing great. Always great to talk with you. And I know it's been a busy last 24 hours. 2 big commitments for the Crimson Tide. Really been a busy July for you. All kinds of commitments coming through this class of 2023. I want to start with a guy, though, as the news came out earlier today. Ty Lockwood has flipped from Ohio State to the Crimson Tide. Talk to us about what went into that flip and what he's going to bring to the Crimson Tide.
Yeah, well, this was kind of an unexpected flip for Alabama, not necessarily over the course of the last couple of days, but if you would have told me somebody was going to flip to Alabama this time last week, I would have never predicted Ty Lockwood as the guy, just because there was just not a ton of interaction between Ty and really any schools, not just Alabama, but he was a pretty solid commitment to Ohio State. Alabama went and saw him back in January. His coach at the time told him, said, hey, he's pretty solid with Ohio State. Thanks for coming. If anything changes, we'll let you know. Well, something changed a little bit in his recruitment, and I think a little bit had to do with Ohio State just recently picked up a commitment from Jelani Thurman, 4-star tight end out of Georgia. And I think it at least opened his mind about taking some more visits. So he decided to take a visit to Alabama last Thursday. Worked out on Friday, received the offer from Nick Saban, and really spent the next couple of days just visiting the campus and just seeing everything, seeing the facilities, spending time with not just the coaches, but the strength and conditioning staff, the training staff, the medical staff, everybody that's associated with the Alabama football program. He was around, but they were also having a cookout this weekend, so you had a lot of commitments who were in town helping recruit Ty throughout the weekend, including some of the recent commitments like Caleb Downs and Justice Haynes. Those were some of the bigger names that were in Tuscaloosa, spending a lot of time with them in recruiting. So on on Saturday morning sometime, I received a call about the possibility of him flipping to Alabama. So I did a little bit of digging and continued to hear that things were looking good for Alabama there. So this is their first tight end commitment in this 2023 recruiting class. First commitment for Joe Cox, the new tight ends coach for Alabama at this position. So big get for Alabama, big loss for Ohio State, because he had been committed to Ohio State since last August and had really been one of the leaders in the recruiting class, just trying to recruit other guys to Ohio State, but now on board with Alabama. Finally was able to get down to Tuscaloosa, see everything. His parents went down there, absolutely loved it. And this is certainly a guy that they wanted. I mean, they liked him a lot. They saw him, like I said, back in January, but Nick Saban wanted him to come down. They wanted him to come down and visit, and when he finally got down there, they extended that offer. He decided to go ahead and commit pretty much on the spot. So this is a 6'5", 225-pound athlete who's had over 1,000 yards receiving combined over the last 2 seasons. I talked to his head coach this morning, Steve Stidham, at Independence High School in Thompson Station, Tennessee, and he really just absolutely raved about this kid, his character, integrity, and also was really really raved about his catch radius. That he's like I said, 6'5", 225, but he can catch a pass pretty much anywhere you throw it. He's that good, and he's certainly going to be an offensive weapon in Alabama's offensive scheme. This isn't a guy who is recruited necessarily to come in and be a blocker. They want him to go out and make big plays, catch touchdowns, and Alabama has recruited the tight end position really well over the course of the last couple of recruiting classes. Last year's class, I think they ended up with 4 total tight ends with the late JUCO guy that transferred in. But overall, you pair him up with Amari Neblack as those elite pass catchers down the road, I mean, I think Alabama quarterbacks are going to be pretty excited with the weapons that they're going to have at their disposal.
Absolutely. Hey, Andrew, this is Gerhard here, newest member of the team. I had a question for you on the other side of the ball, and we talked about this being a really fast-moving 6 weeks or so, but even just yesterday, Hunter Osborne out of Hewitt-Trussville made his commitment. 6'4", 260 pounds, a four-star guy. For whether it's Bama fans or football fans in general, who does he remind you of, or what are some of the things that, from a production standpoint, maybe a size standpoint, that he'll bring to that Crimson Tide defense?
Well, he's a big kid. I mean, he's continued to get bigger over the course of the last couple of years. I think, when he was just a sophomore, he was only about 6'1", 6'2", and now he's 6'4". I think he just measured 267 pounds down in Tuscaloosa this past weekend. So, this is a kid who's very long. He's got great hips, moves really well, can dip, and I think that Alabama was always really intrigued with him, but they wanted to see him just a little bit more. They wanted to see him in camp, and he came back to camp last month, did really well. I think, the biggest thing is there's a lot of defensive linemen throughout the entire country this year, a lot of guys who have not committed just yet. So I think Alabama just wanted to make sure. I think they wanted to go through, all their evaluations after all the coaches returned from their little break. There was all these camps in the month of June, and then all the coaches pretty much left town for a couple weeks and went on vacation. And then everybody came back in mid-July or mid-early July and made some decisions on who they were really going to press for at certain positions. And this was a guy that they were impressed with at the Alabama camp, and then they decided to, let's make a move. Let's start pushing harder for him. I don't think it's necessarily because of Peter Woods going to Clemson, because it's not signing day. We're a long way from signing day. A lot of these guys are still going to be recruited. There's still a lot of time to flip these guys, but I think that as of right now, we're in, second day of August. Alabama's not on Plan B or Plan C type guys just yet. That comes in pretty much November, December, when they're realizing that they're not going to sign certain players. So right now, these are all Plan A guys that they're really going after that they want. So I think that with Hunter Osborne being an in-state kid, they knew that they probably had a really good chance once they started making that big push. And once they did make that push, they were able to get him on board. So a big win for them, big win for Freddie Roach on the recruiting front. So this is the first defensive line commitment. We went into this recruiting cycle saying this is a very important year for defensive line recruits for Alabama. What were they going to be able to do? And there's some guys that we feel like are getting pretty close to making decisions. And we saw one Alabama D-line target already commit in Peter Woods, but as we mentioned, he's still going to be a top target for Alabama all the way until signing day. So we'll keep an eye on Peter Woods, but Hunter Osborne jumping on board as that first D-line commitment. I think Alabama's hoping he can be a big recruiter for them, because he is close with a lot of these in-state kids that they're going after. Peter Woods, Kelby Collins at Gardendale High School, and he'll be pretty active on the recruiting front for them at all the games this fall, and also an official visit down the road.
We're talking with Andrew Bone, BamaInsider.com. He joins us on the All-American HVAC Service hotline. A offensive line target, Miles McVay, was in Tuscaloosa this weekend. Big target for the Crimson Tide. Do you think he's going to end up committing to Alabama?
I do. I'll probably be a little surprised if he doesn't. I think there's some other schools that are certainly involved. He took a visit to Mizzou last week. They're certainly hoping that he'll stay home. He went out to Oregon this summer and to Texas A&M and enjoyed those visits. He also went over to Jackson State, but in the end, I think he's really comfortable with Alabama and the coaching staff there. He took 2 unofficial visits in the last 2 months to Alabama. Spent 3 days in Tuscaloosa last month. Spent 2 days there this month. So, I mean, this is in late July, but they're certainly in the driver's seat, in my opinion. I mean, this is a massive kid. He's 6'7", 340 pounds, but can really move for his size. I mean, he's got a great relationship with the coaching staff led by Eric Wolford, the Alabama offensive line coach. They end up getting Miles McVay on August the 11th when he announces his decision. That would make it 4 offensive linemen in this recruiting class. I still think they're going to end up getting 5. There's a few other guys who are out there. Raymond Polito is a big lineman out of California that has also visited Alabama twice this summer. He was back in town last week. Monroe Freeling, who is the number 1 player in the state of South Carolina, actually made his first ever trip to Alabama this past weekend, is showing a little bit more interest in Alabama, and I think the Tide coaching staff has some strong interest in him as well. We'll see if he makes it back to Alabama for an official visit this football season. But those are some of the guys that are still out there that they're heavily involved in. Samson Okunloa is a 5-star lineman that visited Alabama last month or in June for an official visit. In my opinion, I think he ends up going somewhere else. So I'm really kind of looking at Miles McVay, Raymond Polito, Monroe Freeling as the guys who have the best chance at ending up in Alabama's recruiting class.
Absolutely. Andrew, from a big picture standpoint, you've covered Alabama for a very long time. You've seen the recruiting calendar change, obviously, with the early signing period. There's 8 of their 18 that have committed since the calendar flipped over to the month of July, and obviously we've had 2 in the last 2 days as well. Is this odd from your standpoint? Describe for those who might not know, I guess, this recruiting calendar ever since the early signing day of just the way that everything is scheduled out. Is this just kind of a weird year in general, or is this about what you expect to see moving forward?
Well, I think it's probably going to be what we should expect moving forward. Last year was a little different because last year you had COVID that had really shut things down the previous year. So a lot of kids were taking their official visits. Some were making decisions right away in the month of June. We kind of knew going into this recruiting cycle that things were back to normal. You could go on those spring visits. You could go to junior days. You could go to games in the fall. So you were going out, and these kids were going out and seeing as many programs as they could throughout the fall and all the way up until the summer. Once we kind of got into the summer, we knew a great majority of kids would go ahead and take their official visits, because you can take official visits now, before the start of your senior season. So we saw most of these kids take their visits in the month of June. We knew they were going to take all of them. Most of these guys were going to take all of them before making their commitment. So we knew July was going to be a really big month, or at least for Alabama fans, and Alabama coaches, they were certainly hoping for a big month, because it was pretty slow. There weren't a lot of commitments happening. There were 3 or 4 commitments heading into June, and there were still 3 or 4 commitments in late June. But we just kept telling everybody, be patient. Commitments are going to happen, and boy, have we seen it. I mean, there have been so many guys that have made decisions over the course of the last month and a half, and it's worked out pretty well for Alabama, because they're currently sitting with the number 1 recruiting class in the country. But I think moving forward, now that we've kind of back to normal, and kids can go to games in the fall and go to junior days, and another big thing is coaches can go out on the road again. Coaches weren't allowed to go out. The first time coaches finally went back on the road was this past football season. So they're finally hitting the road again, and I think the calendar's back to being a little bit normal.
Andrew Bone, BamaInsider.com. No one knows more about Alabama football recruiting than Andrew Bone does. We appreciate your time, Andrew, as always, and we'll talk to you again very soon.
Thanks a lot, guys. Have a good one.
Thank you. Andrew Bone doing a great job of covering Alabama football recruiting, and he's been a busy man as Alabama has come in big this summer, like you mentioned, especially in the month of July as far as recruiting. But I think back to a lot of people, and especially after Nick and Jimbo had their back and forth, people were saying, well, is Nick Saban going to be able to recruit at the level that he has, in the past? Mm-hmm. Is NIL going to change things for him? Obviously, no, because he's still bringing them in.
That's exactly right. And I think at the core a core of the recruiting is to convince players that they'll, number one, be better off in your program, but two, all of their dreams will be fulfilled by being there, because all these guys, for the most part, your 4 or 5 star guys they're thinking 3 and 4 years down the road. They're, for the most part, they're not like, trying to maneuver themselves. And I think a lot of them see themselves as, hey, I can come here and then set up my future to go play on the next level. And then if you can make some money in NIL, which I think last year with the NIL coming out, and then Coach Saban coming out and basically saying that Bryce Young was already a millionaire essentially, and he'd had a lot of deals with NIL. I think he understood the landscape, but I think people just went a little crazy thinking, oh, well, Alabama will never be able to compete with the economy of inner school that's got, millions and millions of dollars in a fund. And Bama said, in my opinion, Bama will still recruit its core. Its core is we develop you and we give you a chance to, to succeed off the field. And I think that's still the core of their recruiting as they move forward. Reading some of the things from Ty Lockwood that Andrew talked about earlier, he was blown away by his visit. And of course, I don't know if it's NIL money, but if it's a chance at that. But I think for the most part, it's like, hey, this place is a place that can get the best out of me. I think that'll still be their pitch.
Yeah, for sure. And all the success Alabama's had, you can't blame guys for wanting to come play for Nick Saban, wanting to come play at Alabama, wanting to have a chance to play at the next level. And you see all the players that have been drafted out of Alabama. So, yeah, a great sales pitch if you're Alabama. And like Andrew was hinting at, and I think we're seeing this now more than ever, guys committing somewhere, but when you see that commitment come out, you kind of have to take it as, who knows if they'll be playing there next year.
Yeah, and it's twofold now, because now we're seeing a lot of flips just in general. We saw a guy that we just talked about with Ty Lockwood flipping from one school to another. We had another guy, Elliot Washington II. He's from Florida, committed to Alabama. Then he went to Penn State. And so I think it was one of these situations where we always knew that, as you push these dates earlier and earlier, and there might be some fear of missing out from some of the prospects themselves, they're also gauging the class. They're looking at the 18, 19, 20, 21 guys that have already committed and finding their space. Hey, if I go there, who do I have to compete against to get on the field? How long will I have to wait? Are they starting a freshman here? And so players are maneuvering themselves, and they're thinking with their high school coach and their parents and whatnot, and finding out the best situation for themselves. And then you add on top of that the NCAA transfer waiver, where you get a year, and it's looking like they'll be able to add to that. And so you have a situation where it just creates a lot of mobility. And that's the reason why I think we're seeing so much mobility as it relates to not only commitments, but once they sign, it's almost still, you have to look at it almost with a grain of salt, because it's like, if the guy's not happy in X place, he can leave right then and there and go somewhere else.
Yeah.
And I know that can be frustrating for the coaches, because you basically have to re-recruit your own team over and over and over again. But at the same time, I understand players wanting that mobility, so they're able to get both. But we're seeing that on both sides. Obviously, here we're talking about the flips from the high school angle of it. But I think it's something that we will continue to see as we move forward here in the recruiting cycle.
Absolutely. And I'm interested to see Peter Woods, a guy who Andrew mentioned about 3 or 4 times.
Right.
He's committed to Clemson from Thompson High School.
Right.
But, yeah, you think about some of these other in-state guys who are close, who can help recruit these guys even when they're committed. And I was hearing right after Peter Woods made his commitment to Clemson that he very well could end up not at Clemson. But I think he's going to be one to keep an eye on, just as he sees other in-state guys who he played with maybe go to Alabama or another school. I think he could maybe end up somewhere else.
Yeah, and I'm not saying this, haven't spoken with anybody, this is not reporting or anything, but when I first saw that Clemson commitment, the very first thing I thought was, well, this Alabama staff is not going to stop recruiting him.
No.
Until pen hits paper, they will not stop recruiting him. And then even after the season, you have to kind of gauge where they are after their freshman year. But keep in mind, Jeremiah Alexander, a former teammate of his, is at Alabama, and a guy that's in this year's class, in the class of 2023, in his own graduating class, Tony Mitchell, a 5-star safety, is also in this Alabama class as well. So I'm sure we'll be getting some text messages and some conversations will be had on bus trips to different football games between Tony and Peter, and we'll see if it ends up popping out. But I don't have any shadow of a doubt that Alabama will continue to give them their pitch of the reason why he'd be good in an Alabama uniform, and not only just because he's an in-state talent, and not only because Alabaster sits, not that far away from Tuscaloosa. He's very, very close to home. Another guy that went to Alabama, even though it was for a short little bit. Obviously, Tua's younger brother, Talia Tagovailoa, who made that Thompson High School to Alabama kind of pipeline there. So we'll see if it actually ends up happening with Peter Woods, but I won't be a bit surprised to see if that flip doesn't happen sooner rather than later as we get closer and closer to signing day.
Alabama now has the number 1 class here in the class of 2023, according to most of the recruiting services. Alabama finished number 2 in last year in the class of 2022. Texas A&M, of course, being number 1. Alabama 2. Alabama wants that number 1 spot, and they're on a great pace to get it right now.
They certainly are. They have, as of right now, they have 4 guys that are ranked as 5 stars, depending on which recruiting service you're looking at. But for the most part, the hard commits they have, 18 of them, 17 have obviously official star rankings, and they also have a kicker, Connor Talty, that is coming as well. So one of the best kickers in the country. So I think that this class is starting to gear up to be what we've seen from Alabama. It's been a late push. It's been a late kick, but it's been a kick nonetheless to be able to find themselves back into a position where, hey, it reminds you of what Alabama football recruiting classes used to be. And, of course, Bama will do just what everybody else is doing. The transfer portal is there. It is open. They've already got one player, a player out of LSU who's expected to be a major producer on that defense this year as a corner. So, I mean, this is to me a Bama recruiting class that is reminiscent of what we've seen from previous recruiting classes. So I don't expect them to take their foot off the gas anytime soon.
Absolutely. And Alabama target on the offensive line, Miles McVay, like you heard Andrew say, expected to commit to Alabama. Also, a wide receiver out of the state of Florida, Jared Hamilton, had a really good weekend as well, and they plan for him to commit to the Crimson Tide as well. So it has been a very busy July and on into August with recruiting. We talked about Auburn recruiting yesterday, which it's kind of the opposite on each side of the state. Alabama is bringing them in, and Auburn, what is that, 5, I think we said yesterday. So there's a big difference in recruiting. And the UAB Blazers, and we're going to talk some UAB football later on this week. Got a guest lined up to talk some UAB, but they're also, even with the interim coach, bringing in some recruits. So Auburn's a little behind. They got a long way to go to catch up with the Crimson Tide, but I think they'll be able to get some, as we talked with Keith Niebuhr yesterday.
Exactly. And just like I think if Auburn fans want a glimmer of hope, what you could look at is you could look at Alabama, because Alabama, not that long ago, 6-8 weeks ago, they were sitting there way down in the class rankings, and they were able to get themselves back into a position where they're now number 1 according to most, if not all, of the recruiting services. So I think Auburn fans, there shouldn't necessarily be a strong panic, but I understand the reasons why when you see yourself in the recruiting rankings behind teams like Iowa and teams that are not in Power 5 schools, Power 5 places, conferences. I think that you'll have there is some quote unquote cause for concern, even though it's not panic. And Keith mentioned it yesterday, and I think he's right. I think that there's concern, but not panic, to understand, hey, maybe this will be good overall to help rebrand Auburn and then get some of the guys that they really want. But as of right now, just as a very small class, but Auburn, tends to recruit itself. So we'll see if they can clean up here over the next few months. Absolutely.
Appreciate Andrew Bone there from BamaInsider.com. Now with the On3 Sports Group joining us here on WKXX Live. Hour number 2 on the way next. We'll get into some Auburn basketball. They are going on their tour through Israel right now, playing some games. They had their first game earlier today. And some new names, new faces on that Auburn basketball team. We'll talk that coming up. We'll also we'll get you ready for Braves Phillies coming up a little bit later on. All that is in hour number 2. Stick around. Here's WKXX Live. Jason Gerhard with you till 4 o'clock here on Fox Sports 102.9.
You know who WKXX
For WKXX Live.
Hour number 2 on this Tuesday afternoon, August the 2nd, 2022. Chase Robinson, Gerhard Mathangani along with you as we make our way through this Tuesday. Braves baseball coming your way a little bit later on. 5:05 is the Ford leadoff show. 6:20 is the first pitch there between the Braves and the Phillies. But Gerhard, we don't always talk about college basketball this time of the year. But Auburn is over in Israel playing basketball right now. Really cool opportunity for them. And especially with a team like Auburn, a lot of new faces on this team. A couple of names that you're familiar with, but a lot of new faces that are really stepping up. And they played their first game today, got a 117-56 win over the Israel under-20 team. But good day for some new guys there at Auburn.
Yeah, most certainly. I think this is a really interesting trip for Coach Bruce Pearl. And we see this a lot of times in the summertime. You see it sometimes with high school teams. They'll go to team camp. Every now and again, college teams will do something right before the season starts. But I think this was a really interesting trip here for Coach Pearl and the Tigers. We'll talk about the on-court stuff right now, and then we'll talk about some of the off-court stuff as well, because on the court, obviously, you're trying to replace two guys that went into the first round of the NBA draft not that long ago, and Walker Kessler as well as Jabari Smith. And so you have two big guys you're trying to replace there. And the guys that are, quote-unquote, the next man up, and players that have had a whole lot of hype going into this season, Johnny Broome and Johan Traore, and both those guys look to be really promising players for this team. And what a way to get off. Both those guys ended up leading the team in scoring today. Traore with 20 points, Johnny Broome with 17 points and 9 rebounds, and then Dylan Cardwell, who had 12 points, 14 rebounds, and 3 blocks. And he was a guy from last year, as was KD Johnson, who was a guard on last year's team and really kind of helped facilitate the offense. 13 points for him today. So I understand it's the under 20 team for Israel, and some of the players from Auburn are older and more talented than that team over there. But I think for what they're trying to go for, they're looking for some cohesiveness. They're looking for some team unity. You get that when you fly to another place, no matter whether it's here or across the world, like the trip is right now. But also for them, it's a chance to bond with one another in a foreign land, in a foreign country. Also take in obviously a lot of the scenics. There's a lot of history, biblical history, no matter which religion. So much of that is rooted right there in Israel, right there in Jerusalem. So they have a great chance to bond as a team, to learn about another culture, and to get on the court and play some basketball together. And it looks like Auburn basketball is off to another good start in their first of 3 exhibitions.
Yeah, and really cool opportunity for them. And like Bruce Pearl said, I was reading on Twitter just some comments from him following the game. It's the first time these guys have played together, and they played well together. And Auburn, like you mentioned, has a lot to replace, some big shoes to fill there on this Auburn team. But like we were talking about Alabama football with recruiting, I think the same can be said about Bruce Pearl and Auburn. The guy's a recruiter. He's going to bring in the best of the best, and we're seeing that right here.
Exactly, and that's kind of been his MO really ever since he got to the Power 5 level. And he's won just about everywhere that he has been, and he understands the power of recruiting. And I think that he understands the power of the Auburn brand and trying to brand Auburn as an everything school. And they say that, but I think that he really tries to embrace that. And Auburn spent a lot of last year as the number 1 team in the nation. A lot of people had a lot of expectations of them going into the tournament. They fell short of, I think, what their goals were. But I think we understand with Auburn that they will be a perennial power. Last 2 years, they've really done well in the SEC, and they've really recruited well. So whether it's a guy like Walker Kessler, who immediately comes in, transfers in from another blue blood program, transfers from North Carolina, comes to the Auburn basketball team, immediately ingratiates himself. He wins the SEC and the National Defensive Player of the Year. Jabari Smith, a top 5 player overall in the NBA draft. And so they're great representation and there's a great ambassadors for Auburn as they go to the NBA. So now for every single player that's like, oh, hey, can Auburn's brand get me to the next level? Well, he just has to, pull up, hey, the last two guys that made a huge impact here, they were able to go to the next level. So it feeds right into the recruiting that you're talking about. And then these guys that are a part of Auburn right now, I think Coach Bruce Pearl wants to run a certain style of basketball, and both Traore and Broome really bring that. Broome 6'10", 235 pounds, almost the same height and weight there as Jabari as Walker Kessler. And so Jabari Smith and Traore and Broome looking to be kind of what Smith and Walker or Smith and Kessler were last year. So we'll see how they will end up playing as they continue to suit up for Auburn. Obviously, the under-20 Israel team is not the Kentucky Wildcats. It's not Tennessee. It's not Vanderbilt. It's not what Alabama will put on the court next year. But I think it's great for the team's motion forward.
Absolutely, and especially the way, because you mentioned those two SEC teams, the way SEC basketball is now. If Auburn wants to be successful, they've got to go out and recruit well. They've got to get these guys in, and they're doing a good job of doing that.
Yeah.
And I think that SEC basketball is going to stay at the level that it is. So I think Auburn's going to stay right there in getting these big time recruits.
That's exactly right. And you talked about the recruiting angle of it, and ironically today Auburn ended up getting another player to commit to the Tigers, the number 26 player as of right now, and a top 30 player, I should say, in all of the recruiting services. Aiden Holloway is his name, and like I said, he's a top 100 player overall. Has a really great style of play, and he says that he's coming to Auburn. He's to me, I think he's one of these kind of players that understands what Auburn is trying to build and understands, hey, if I'm going to be the point guard of this basketball team as we move forward, we understand that we're going to need some big men down there to be able to give us size in the post, but we're also going to need to be able to play spread out basketball. And he is one of the guys right now that I believe that they think he can take the reins of this offense, help Auburn get into its offense, and then be able to execute. Top 5 point guard as of right now in the class of 2023. So the recruiting, as you talked about earlier, is a key cog for this Auburn basketball team, and it looks like they were continuing that with another commitment here today.
Absolutely, as Auburn gets the win in their first exhibition game there on their Israel tour, and we'll continue to keep up with Auburn basketball and what's to come as they go through their exhibition games there over in Israel. Not always talking college basketball here in early August. We talk a lot of college football, and we're going to do that coming up next as CBS Sports has released their top 131 programs. They have ranked all of the FBS football programs. We will look at that list when we come back. It is a Tuesday edition of WKXX Live. Chasing Gerhard with you until 4 o'clock. Stick around with more here on Fox Sports 1029.
Right now, it's a great
We are back here on WKXX Live. Tuesday afternoon, Chase Robinson, Gerhard, Mathangani along with you. Glad you're hanging out with us. And we've had a lot to discuss as we move through the show today. And we're going to jump into some college football talk now. CBSSports.com has come out with their top 131 college football programs. And heading into this 2022 year. And top three, kind of what we expected. I think that's the top three on everybody's list. That is Alabama, Ohio State, Georgia. Could really be at any of those spots, 1 to 3. But we get it's a little interesting after 3. CBS, we'll start here, has Utah number 4. Not who I would put at number 4 for sure.
Yeah, and they even addressed it as the article. There's a short kind of prelude before the ranking, and it says that there's going to be some debate there. I get why people think Utah will have a good year this year. They return a lot of players back from last year's team. They also brought in a Florida transfer, a linebacker, Mohamed Diabate, who led Florida last year in tackling. And, of course, the quarterback comes back. And that's usually where these things come from. If your quarterback had a great season the year before and they come back, obviously people think that, you're destined to have, once again, another strong year. Well, they have a little over 60% of their offense coming back as far as total production. And people expect Cam Rising, their quarterback, to be a Heisman Trophy contender. Threw for close to 2,500 yards last year, 20 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, 84.2 QBR. So I think that's where a lot of the hype comes from. And people obviously think that he'll, be a name to watch out for, because if you look at the top 4, you look at Alabama, their quarterback by heart. It's Bryce Young. You obviously know Ohio State with C.J. Stroud coming back. Georgia, they've returned Stetson Bennett, and Utah with Cam Rising, and then Clemson with DJ Uiagalelei. So I think a lot of this is quarterback driven going into this season. 4 to me seems a little high. And maybe that's part of the reason why they put it out there anyways, to get people talking. And that's what a lot of these preseason rankings end up doing anyways. It just gets us talking about the season. But this is a Utah team, keep in mind, that lost 4 games last year. They did end up winning the Pac-12 championship. And if they want to find themselves in that championship game back in Los Angeles, back in Southern California, they're going to have to put together yet another great year. And obviously, to say that Cam Rising and that offense have some pressure put on them now, it's pretty certain right now with another major publication saying they're top 5.
Yeah, for sure. So they got Utah 4, Clemson 5, Notre Dame 6, Oklahoma 7, Michigan 8, Texas A&M 9, and Baylor 10. Is Clemson? Do you think they realistically have a chance to maybe be a playoff team again? I know last year, 10-3, not what we're used to from Clemson. They weren't a bad football team, right? Do you think they could be a playoff team again?
I think that their talent says that they could be a playoff team. They've recruited so well over the last 4 years that I believe that their talent will be enough. Now, I think with Clemson, they lost a lot of their strength. Keep in mind, their longtime defensive coordinator, who was there through all the championships, through the rise of Dabo, and this entire great run that they've had. Obviously, we look at last year as a bit of a letdown because they weren't necessarily able to score, and they just didn't look like the same Clemson that we came to know. Finished the year, according to this poll, number 16 in the polls, 3 losses overall for the season. They have the talent to do so. Now, can they regroup? Because their defensive coordinator, Brent Venables, he's now the head coach at Oklahoma. They have a lot of continuity that they had last year and the year before. A lot of that's going to be gone. I think this is a make or break year for Clemson. I think we'll find out who Clemson really is. Are they back to that team that loses 4 games, 3 and 4 games a year? Or can they regroup and find themselves once again back in the top 3, top 4, getting themselves into a semifinal and possibly a national championship? I think they'll have a strong year. I do think, though, there is still that gap that sits between where Alabama and where Georgia is going into this year, and Ohio State this year. I think those are clearly the top 3 teams in the country. And then there's that next echelon of teams. not necessarily lower echelon. Just, I mean, there's not some huge gap between them. It's not like, the Sisters of the Poor or whatever, but it is a big gap. And I think that Clemson sits in that gap. I think Notre Dame sits in that gap as well. I think Michigan does too. Texas A&M does as well, and Clemson right there in that mix too. So, and then Utah probably find themselves in that as well. So they have the talent to do so. I just still don't think that they're up there with Bama, Ohio State, and Georgia just yet.
Yeah, certainly so. Again, we're talking about the CBSSports.com poll as they rank all 131 teams. Alabama is at the top of their poll, scrolling all the way down to number 130, Florida International.
Wow.
They are according to CBS, the worst team in college football.
Wow. And obviously, this goes at the beginning of the season. You're taking a lot of what happened the season before. But I mean, even like just scrolling, in, out through the polls and whatnot, you see some teams that I think maybe a little bit underranked. And I think that teams that I believe, hey, they can use this as some motivation as they go into the season, going into next year. I really like what I like what LSU has going together with Coach Brian Kelly. I think that there's still some things that they need to solidify from a program standpoint, but I really like what I'm seeing so far. I think USC will be really interesting this year with their new head coach. As well with Lincoln Riley. So I think that there's going to be a lot to digest between now and then. There's always a surprise. There's always an injury or two that shakes up a team's chances. But you see Texas A&M there at number 9. You see Oregon there at 14. I really like Coach Dan Lanning and what he brings to the Ducks. And Miami is another team. We talked about all these schools. It never have we had in my lifetime that I can remember so many marquee jobs open all in the same year, when Oklahoma becomes open and USC becomes open and LSU becomes open and Oregon is open, a team that has found recent success and recent dominance. It makes for a really interesting year overall. And I think that some of these teams that are on here, I think that they'll be able to make a push. Arkansas being one, they're ranked number 16. I think they'll have a really strong year as well. So it'll be interesting to see how it all shakes out there. But poor FIU, they're very, very bottom of the poll.
Yeah. Just looking at SEC teams, we mentioned Alabama 1, Georgia 3 in this particular poll. Texas A&M 9, Arkansas 16, Kentucky 23, Tennessee 24, and then Ole Miss there at 27. Would you have thought more SEC teams would have been in the top 25?
Yeah, I would. And honestly, from my perspective, I think Kentucky's going to have a really tremendous season. I think that if they're top 15 going into the year or going into those final games of the year, I wouldn't be a bit surprised. Arkansas, I touched on them earlier. I think they'll have a great season as well. I think Tennessee will continue the same momentum that they had. So to find themselves, to see themselves on the bottom side of that top 25, I think it's really interesting, especially when you see other teams that have a lot of questions to answer, teams like Oklahoma State and teams like Wisconsin, as well as teams like Cincinnati. Can they repeat what they've done? And they lose their starting quarterback as well in Desmond Ridder. So you have teams that I believe are a little overranked, and teams that are in the SEC, in my opinion, a little bit underranked considering what they have coming back going into this year. So what makes this all fun, though, Florida is, I know, a team that we'll talk about a little bit later on in our program. They're right there at number 30. I think that they could be a better team than that ranking. LSU's at 31. To me, they're kind of hit and miss right now. So these are teams that have marquee talent on them. Now, can they get the coaching right and whatnot to be able to find themselves back where they rightfully think that they should be? We will see. But a lot of hope in teams that had a strong season last year, and like a team like Cincinnati and Utah. I'm like, hey, to me, Utah doesn't necessarily have to quote unquote prove it to me, because I think I know they have a pretty strong team coming back. A team like Cincinnati, when you lose your first round corner in Kobe Bryant, and then you also lose your quarterback, and you lose a big part of that defense. To me, I think that Cincinnati is a little bit overranked, and teams like Florida, LSU, Kentucky especially, and Tennessee are underranked.
Yeah, for sure. And Utah and Florida play week 1. That should be an interesting matchup there. Several interesting matchups in week 1. Looking forward to those. I want to get into the Florida Gators coming up next, specifically on the recruiting side of things. It has been kind of an interesting ride for Billy Napier so far when it comes to recruiting. And so we'll dive into that coming up next. We'll also preview that Braves-Phillies game coming up tonight a little bit later on as well. But want to remind you that we are brought to you in part by Frank's Roofing. Frank's Roofing helped us out. Our studio developed a leak, so that's who we called. The estimate was free, the price was fair, and his crew was on it the next day. You know what the best part was? They were professional. They were courteous. They fixed the problem in one visit. They didn't leave a mess. They got the job done and were very efficient. Do what we did. Trust Frank's Roofing for your shingle, metal, or flat roof repair or replacement. You can call 256-458-8531 for a free estimate. That is 256-458-8531. That is Frank's Roofing, and they help bring you WKXX Live. We will be back with more in just a moment. Chasing Gerhard with you this afternoon until 4 o'clock right here on Fox Sports 102.9.
Did you know not washing your
We're back here at WKXX Live. Chase and Gerhard with you this afternoon here on Fox Sports 102.9. 256-413-1029 is our phone number. That is 256-413-1029 if you'd like to call in and be a part of the show today. We've talked some recruiting on the Alabama side of things. I want to switch gears, Gerhard, to the Florida Gators under first-year head coach Billy Napier. And if you remember back in the early part of the summer, Jaden Rashada is a guy that Florida was really hard after. He decides to go down to the southern part of the state to Miami to play for Mario Cristobal. That really upset the Florida fans, and they were not happy with Billy Napier that he couldn't land Jaden Rashada. So a lot of people immediately started writing off Billy Napier and the Florida Gators. We talked to a guy who covers college football down in Jacksonville, Florida. He said the folks there were not happy with Billy Napier. But I think that was way too quick because he has had an excellent July. He had an excellent weekend this past weekend with 4 4-stars committing to the Florida Gators. He's never recruited the SEC, but he has relationships. He's recruited when he was in Louisiana.
Right.
And I think that's important to remember that he has recruited the area, just not for an SEC school.
That's exactly right, especially as the head coach. And so you now have a situation at Florida where you are at one of the marquee programs. And I think Florida is one of those programs is a little bit like LSU. It almost sells itself no matter who the coach is. And if you think back to some of the reasons why the frustrations continue to grow with Dan Mullen, it wasn't necessarily on the field, even though there were disappointing times there as well. It was mainly in the recruiting space and how he was continuously getting out recruited, especially by their rivals. Georgia was out recruiting them. LSU was out recruiting them. And both teams had gone on to win a national championship in the time that Dan Mullen was there. So I think that for the Gators, that initial response when they couldn't get one player, when they couldn't get one recruit, it was, let's hit the panic button. We're still back in the old ways where we can't recruit as well as we would like. And I think that it now trending back in the direction that they are accustomed to. According to the On3 rankings, they rank number 13 right now after that fantastic weekend that you just highlighted. They have a program called Friday Night Lights, I believe, is down there, and they're able to get a lot of players, and they were able to pick up one from right here in the state of Alabama, a young man from Gardendale, 3 guys from the state of Florida, and 1 guy from Alabama, Kelby Collins, a 4-star player out of Gardendale, Alabama, says that he's heading over. So it's really interesting to see how Coach Napier is doing things from the recruiting standpoint. He understands obviously how important this is. You could be a great in-game coach, but you need to have the horses, so to speak, to be able to run with the teams in this league year in and year out. You saw what Alabama and Georgia put on the field last year as far as that national championship game and the SEC championship game. I mean, those were two. I mean, they looked like NFL teams. Yeah. The speed, the size, the athleticism, and to be able to compete year in and year out, you have to be able to put a similar product on the field. And it looks like Coach Napier, after maybe an early stumble with one player, has really cleaned up well. However, as we talked about with Alabama, it's got to go to signing day, and it's got to get to where number one, pen meets paper. But then when they get down to Gainesville, having a chance to really to grow themselves as an athlete and be able to continue what Florida started a long time ago with great recruiting classes. Yeah,
and you think about just the brand of Florida football, like you were just saying. You think back to mid 2005, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Florida was the place to go.
Right.
And then you think about the era of Will Muschamp and Dan Mullen when that kind of went away. Well, just because of the brand, people know the Florida Gators. I think Billy Napier has a chance to get it back up there. I really do.
Yeah, so do I. And I think that he understands the magnitude of what he's dealing with. And every day, I mean, you go there and you look at the championship banners, whether it's the SEC championships or whether it's the national championships, the Heisman trophies. I mean, the allure is still there with the Gators. And I think that they're one of the programs where they've had so much success over the past 50 years. I don't think it hasn't come necessarily in these kind of large, huge chunks. Like this Alabama chunk that they're riding right now. that USC little chunk of space that they rode back in the early 2000s. It hasn't come like that, but it has come. Obviously with Steve Spurrier dating it a little bit further back, and then you had the Tim Tebow era. This is a proud program, that really, number one, loves their sport. They know their sport. They're really smart fans there in that fan base, and they understand that, hey, we got to be able to compete from a recruiting standpoint, and that's exactly what they want to do, and I think that they're on the right track.
And when it comes to Florida, looking at this class, and we were talking at SEC Media Days with a guy who covers Florida football, and he says that a big number of these commitments are within 300 miles of Gainesville. Florida's got really good high school football.
Oh, yeah.
Some of the best in the country. So if Billy Napier can get those guys around him to start with, I think that's a good start.
Exactly. Florida kind of is a lot like Miami in a sense where you don't have to go very far for talent. And same thing in Texas, and same thing in Southern California. There's more schools in the state of Florida that play Power 5 football, so you have to recruit a little bit harder in your own backyard, and then really respectable programs like Central Florida, and at times, like we've seen with different programs, especially down in the southern part of the state of Florida. Obviously, it goes a little bit up and down with FIU, FAU, and some of those teams. However, you talk about Florida State, Miami, and Florida. Those three teams, for the most part, are competing with each other for the majority of the prospects. And you can't let Miami, as of right now, they have some good juice behind them as well with their new head coach in Mario Cristobal. And so the juice is down in Miami. I think the juice is up in Miami. I think the anticipation and hype is also up right now with the Florida Gators as well. So it's a program that, like I said, you don't have to go very far for a lot of talent. Most of their players on their roster are from the state of Florida. And so can they continue this run? Can they continue this momentum? That'll be the question. That'll be the key. And I think Billy Napier is the guy to get them there. And he obviously knows what he's up against.
Yeah. And looking at the schedule, kind of flipping over to just Florida in general, they open up with Utah, and they've got Kentucky after that, then South Florida, then they're at Tennessee, and then they've got Eastern Washington, and then Missouri. But, I mean, you look at Utah, Kentucky, USF, and then Tennessee. That's 4 tough games, but 3 really tough games in the first 4.
Oh, yeah. And we talked earlier about Kentucky, how Kentucky is seemingly one of the kind of the media darlings, one of the favorites, quote unquote, so to speak, to kind of challenge Georgia there in the SEC East. Florida wants to put themselves right up there as well. We saw how everything, kind of shook out at the end of last year. You mentioned that Utah game. That's a team that we expect a lot of good things from. So, I mean, Utah and Kentucky right out of the gate is going to be, I think, really, really interesting. And then 3 home games in a row, and then your first road game, welcome to Neyland Stadium and playing those Tennessee Volunteers, who have a whole lot of momentum going for them as well. So it can go off the rails really quickly. This program can establish itself as one of the top programs in the country quickly. If they go 4-0, they're going to be a top 15 team going into that Week 5 game against Eastern Washington. So this is, to me, a team that, in my opinion, that they have a lot to prove, and they don't have a whole lot of time to try to figure all these things out. I think that they have to step on the gas very, very early, especially with that first game against Utah over at Florida Field.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see what the Gators can do. They lost 5 of their last 7 games last season, and so we'll see if they can put some wins together in what could be a wild SEC finish as far as teams. Just really, it's hard to get a outlook on what this year's SEC is going to look like. Besides Alabama, besides Georgia, I mean, it could be up to a number of teams.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that there's to me a lot of teams that right now in the kind of outside looking in that can vie, in my opinion, for that next spot. And you hate to just pencil in Alabama and Georgia, but they just seem to everybody like that's the two teams that are up top. And so you have one fittingly enough in each division for now on divisions, and we'll see if that continues to stick around. But we will see if Florida can put themselves there. The thing about the SEC that I love, though, is that they don't handpick these things. You have to earn it. You have to go out and earn it. And we just talked about Florida's schedule. They'll have to earn it. Their first two SEC East games are Kentucky and Tennessee. Two other teams, in my opinion, that can be right there for that second spot there in the SEC East behind Georgia. So it will be earned and it will be difficult. But I am very, very, very excited about that Utah game to start the season. And then right there for game number 2 against Kentucky, I think we'll learn a lot about this Florida football team within the first 8 quarters of ball.
Yeah, for sure. It's right around the corner. We'll be getting the party started for college football this year. But baseball is going on, and Braves play tonight against the Phillies. We'll dive into that next, give you the starting lineup, pitching matchup, all that good stuff coming up next as Braves and Phillies meet up a little bit later on. We'll take a timeout. Be back with more WKXX Live. Chase and Gerhard with you till 4 o'clock here on Fox Sports 102.9.
You know who WKXX calls for all their
We're back here, WKXX Live. Chase Robinson, Gerhard, Mathangani here. As we continue on this Tuesday afternoon. Got Braves Phillies coming up tonight, 5:05. You'll hear the Ford leadoff show from the Braves Radio Network. And then at 6:20, they'll throw the first pitch there in Truist Park there in Atlanta. Spencer Strider is on the mound tonight for the Braves. Nick Nelson up for the Phillies. Strider 5-3 on the year, 2.91 ERA, 120 strikeouts on the year for Nelson. He's 3-1, 3.94 ERA, 48 strikeouts. Spencer Strider is one of these guys that we knew he was going to be good, and when he came in as a guy out of the bullpen, I mean, he pitched great, but I was watching during spring training. And, he's throwing 100 miles an hour. Mm-hmm. And I knew this guy, and watching him when he played in college as well, I knew this guy was going to be good. And he's been a really good fit in the starting rotation.
Most certainly. We talked about a young guy in Juan Soto earlier. This is another young guy that has really stepped right in and made his presence known on the baseball team. Just 23 years old, and as you talked about, he's throwing gas right now. He and Kyle Wright right now are the kind of two young guys that I think the fans have really come to love and appreciate, and he's playing some of his best baseball here lately. And you talked earlier about the 5-3 overall record, but I mean, he to me is starting to find a bit of a groove right now. A lot of these young guys, where you want to start keeping an eye on them is towards the end of the year. It's right now. It's as we get deeper and deeper. Their high school days, their college days, they don't play this late into the year. Their arm isn't used for this long.
Yeah.
I know guys play summer ball and stuff like that, but this is baseball on its highest level, going further and further into the year. So we'll see what Spencer has for tonight against these Phillies that can really hit the ball. You talk about JT Ramiro. You talk about Kyle Schwarber. This is a really, really strong baseball team as far as offense goes. They scored 7 runs on them last time. As of right now, the series, they've played 10 games. They've split those 10 games, 5 games apiece, and the Phillies won the last game 7-2. So it's one of those, I think, interesting matchups from a Braves standpoint, considering the fact that you have the Mets to end the week. You have these 2 games here against the Phillies. Phillies that have been a thorn in the side, so to speak. They've like I said, they split the last few, but they've put up 14 runs 5 games ago, 6 runs the previous game, 7 runs in a win. All those games I mentioned are in winning efforts. So the Braves can ill afford to give up a bunch of runs. So today it'll be really interesting to see how Strider handles this lineup.
And you think about the NL East, the Braves still 3 games back of the New York Mets. The Phillies then behind the Braves. You want to get these wins, one, to pad your lead against the Phillies, but you're looking at the Mets. Mm-hmm. You're eyeing them in those 3 games that's sitting between you and first place. You get these 2 wins going into a 5-game series with the Mets. These are 2 big games.
Yeah, most certainly. And I think it does something energetically to the ball club as well. Once everybody's finished with the trade deadline, and now you kind of know which teams have done what and what teams will look like as they move forward. This is a really important 2-game stretch here for the Braves because, number one, you see how the dust settles. You saw where the Braves are buyers, so to speak, and they were able to get guys not only in the free agent deal, but then also ink up Austin Riley to a really long contract as well. So I think that you'll start to find out where teams are as they head into the stretch run of the season. And you mentioned it. They have a really long series against the Mets coming up. They can ill afford to look ahead. Get these 2 games, get some momentum rolling into that series against the Mets, and then you'll have something to do about specifically that 3.5-game lead. You have nothing to do about it right now. You can just win the games that are in front of you. You got these 2 games in front of you, and then you can take on the Mets. And you, like I said, take on the Mets after the trade deadline, finding out where everybody is. So this is a really important 2-game stretch, and especially with it being at home, a really good chance to get some good juice, get some good momentum before not only that Mets series, but they have another series on the road after that as well. So it's a really long road trip after this one.
It is. And so you got Braves, Phillies tonight. Here's what the lineup looks like for the Braves. You got Acuna leading off, Dansby Swanson second, Matt Olson in the 3 spot, Austin Riley bats 4th, Eddie Rosario 5th, William Contreras is in catching tonight. He bats 6th, Marcell Ozuna bats 7th, Orlando Arcia bats 8th, and then Michael Harris bats ninth. So it's Acuna, Swanson, Olson, Riley, Rosario, Contreras, Ozuna, Arcia, and Harris. That's the lineup tonight. And I'm interested. That's pretty typical Braves lineup. I'm interested to see as some new guys roll in how the lineup will change. And because you're sitting here in August, you got 2 months of baseball left. You're getting guys you've never played with, and I'm interested to see how that will change the lineup moving forward.
Yeah, the dynamic with the lineup will be really interesting. If there's any manager I trust to be able to tinker where it needs to tinker, it's Brian Snitker, and understanding how this ball club is. Obviously, you lose a bat like Freddie Freeman, and I think that he's done a good job with the lineup in his absence, being able to find production where they need it, and being able to not only just find that production, but also when they do need a big defensive game, they get that as well. They won their previous game 1-0, and Austin Riley was the one that came up with that big hit. So, to me, this is a team that could find ways to win different ways. And then now with the trade deadline now seemingly behind them, and they might make a move in the next hour or so, might make another move in the next hour. So I don't necessarily expect that. But finding out kind of where this team is, they have different ways that they can win. And obviously they want to put a lot of runs up on the board against a team like Philadelphia, who could do the exact same. But as you kind of take your eye down the road to the stretch run of the season, you want your pitching top notch. They've settled that. They now got 6 starters now in their rotation, and then you also have a situation where you've added another bat to your lineup as well. So if anything falters there with the bats, there's plenty of choices there for the skipper to make.
Absolutely. And now tomorrow's Braves game is an early one, 11:20. They'll throw the first pitch, 10:05. You can turn on here Fox Sports 1029 and hear the Ford Leadoff Show tomorrow. So we'll be a little late coming on the air tomorrow afternoon. But shortly after 2, I'm sure we'll be on the air with the early game happening. But tonight, 5:05 airtime, 6:20 first pitch. And then tomorrow, 10:05 a.m. is the airtime for an 11:20 first pitch there with the Braves and Phillies. And then on the road to New York, beginning Thursday for the Braves against the Mets. They've got that double header on Saturday to make it a 5-game series there between the Braves and the Mets. As again, trying to kind of squish 5 games, and that's a lot of baseball with 2 teams who are battling out for the top spot in the NL East.
Yeah, it certainly is, and obviously, from a scheduling standpoint, you knew that some of these would have to happen after the initial lockout or the initial the delay between the owners and the players. When that happened earlier in the year, you knew that they were going to have to try to fit some games in late. They were able to do a little bit of that before the All-Star break, and we'll see a little bit of that as they try to get all 162 in before the end of the year.
Yeah, so that should be a fun series to follow there as we get ready to wrap up another edition of WKXX Live here on this Tuesday. Another show. It seems like it just flies by.
I know it certainly does, and a lot of good stuff today. I think Andrew Bone really hit on a lot of what we've been thinking about this Alabama recruiting class and being able to kind of add some details and some structure to it. You try to learn something new every day, and he provided a ton of great insight as it relates to that, and we expect the news to continue rolling there from Tuscaloosa.
Absolutely, and we'll have plenty more Major League Baseball to talk about tomorrow. I'm sure trades are happening as we speak, and we'll keep an eye on that and pass that information along to you tomorrow as well. But once again, another great show in the books here on this Tuesday. Again, a little bit of a probably a late show coming up tomorrow as the Braves have the early game. But we will be along with you whenever that wraps up. We'll hop on with you here on WKXX Live. Braves baseball coming your way a little bit later. 5:05 airtime, 6:20 first pitch from the Braves Radio Network. Ben Ingram and Peter Moylan joining Ben Ingram this week there on the Braves Radio Network. That's going to do it for us. Hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday, and we'll talk to you tomorrow.
Surge Staffing has hundreds of